Hey everyone, welcome to another Ahead of the Curve show. Today I've got my guest Cameron Yeary on the show. Cameron, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So how's the weather in beautiful Denver, Colorado?
I actually don't know. That's one thing we didn't talk about, is that my wife took a full-time job and we have escaped America during the pandemic. I'm actually living in Germany right now.
No.
Yeah. So she has taken a full-time position with the Air Force, and so I'm running all of our crews and doing all of our work from here in Germany because, well, it's all virtual, so why not?
So where in Germany are you?
I am technically in a place called Danzenberg, which is a suburb of Kaiserslautern.
I have no idea where that is.
I don't even know either. I believe it's slightly, well, I can tell you it's an hour and a half west of Frankfurt.
An hour and a half west of Frankfurt. Okay.
Yes.
So kind of heading towards Berlin? Or
No,
heading in? Because Berlin would be, did you say west? Did you say west of Frankfurt?
Yes. West.
Okay, west. Yes, I got my directions all mixed up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Cologne, kind of Cologne area. Well, not Cologne because that would be more north, right?
Yeah, they're more north, a little bit northwest.
Well, that's some really interesting news.
Yeah.
Kevin, could you let us give us a little insight as to what Thrasos Media is, how it got started, and how you kind of got into the industry?
So those three totally different stories. Got in the industry a long time ago.
Number one.
Yeah. Got in the industry a long time ago. Started, I guess you could say, professionally, if we're saying professionally is the way that you get paid, working at Six Flags over Texas at the Hot Rock and Country Show. And I did lighting there, and then kind of worked my way through shops and different jobs and playing around and doing lighting probably up until 2008. And I kind of started doing the media server thing and did the media server thing. I was part of a lighting design firm at the time called Unlimited Visibility. And I did that until a few years ago, which we broke off and became Thrasos Media. So the company is owned and operated by me and Brandon Roth. And we basically specialize in media servers and kind of technical direction and technical consulting and large project management, usually involving media servers in some form or fashion. But since the pandemic has started, we have kind of transformed what we are doing to mostly doing virtual and online events.
I was going to say, did you pivot?
Yeah, I've started to try to avoid that word because it's a weird one. But I also am not sure I like transform either. But
I like to use the word evolve.
Evolve, yeah. But I feel like I want to evolve back as well. I think of it now as just the idea that we've, kind of added a separate area to our business.
Yeah, definitely. Things have been. I was going to use the word transformational because things have really kind of transformed in many different ways. But when you're transforming, you can easily transform to what is pushing forward, and you can also transform and go back. Yeah, George, as George is saying, that's our word. Have you patented that word, George? So I just wanted to mention to the viewers that are watching that might not be aware of the format, we keep this very conversational. If you guys have any questions at any time, please feel free to post them in the comments. As well as some of you already know and are quite verbal about it, you could place comments even about things that we're speaking about in general, and be part of the conversation. So we try and keep this very, very casual and very open-minded. So please feel free to comment away, and no question's a dumb one. We're here to support you guys, and we want you to be as much a part of this as we are as well. And it looks like Dan Roboto has been like trekking along already. Extended events is the one I like to avoid, or that like avoids the V word. So yeah, and reinvention is definitely another one, Tracy, for sure. I think there's been a lot of reinventioning that has been happening with a lot of company and a lot of people. So Cameron, can you tell us a little bit about what Thrasos is doing currently, and what you've done in your transformation, or your reinvention or evolution?
Yeah.
Thrasos.
Well, I'd like to kind of tell the story from the start of I guess the beginning of the pandemic. I guess sometime in March. Me and my business partner were doing a job in Las Vegas, and that job started to get kind of weird. They talked about the company not showing up. It was a large construction company event, and they were talking about the actual people who ran the booth not showing up and us trying to do the booth ourselves. And then they started cutting parts of it while we're on site. And as all that was happening, Tim and I...
This was for a trade show?
Correct, yes. Yeah. A large construction trade show in the parking lot of Circus with giant vehicles that weigh, I don't even know how many hundreds of tons. But we started to see things fall off the calendar. And when we did, him and I were scheduled to go to Hawaii together for his wedding. And while we were there, our calendar just started to empty. And we both kind of said, hey, we're just going to have a good week while we're here, because we're already here and we can't stop or control anything. So we're in Hawaii, and we decided to have a good time and deal with it when we got back. And we got back and we looked and saw how much money we had and who we thought was going to pay us that owed us money and how that was going to play out. And we determined what our runway was and decided that we felt we had enough runway to really keep our team working at some reduced salaries and really kind of come up with some solutions, right? We knew something was going to happen. And so our first kind of iteration of things were to take our media servers and flip them over to streaming machines, right? So we have media servers and other laptops and things that we had to do shows in real life in all kinds of different ways. And we realized that we were starting to hit bandwidth limits, both from some internet issues, as well as the amount of shows we could do at one time, right? We could really only do maybe 2 or 3 shows at a time. So we started to look at how could we do these same kind of things in the cloud, right? And so we started looking at AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft's Azure, and we developed a methodology for taking all of our show gear that we need and putting them in the cloud. And that's been actually pretty successful for us. We are able to spin up systems as small or as large as you need them to be, and we don't have to put anybody in a studio to gather. And we're able to do shows remotely with remote gear. And our bandwidth limits are never really a problem. If we need more computers, we just build more computers. It takes a matter of minutes. And so we're really able to tailor stuff for our clients a lot more efficiently now than we were when we were doing it with terrestrial systems.
That makes a whole lot of sense. So in the conversion process, what were some of the biggest challenges that you had in kind of, let's rewind a little back, rewind a little bit of time. You had all the events, of course, on Wind in, March, where things really started to hit the fan and things started to shut down and events cancel. I think that was definitely a head-turning moment for everybody in the live events industry, where things were just, it was like absolute chaos and it was a slaughter for a lot of companies. But with that being completely unpredictable, it's very hard to determine what to do next. What kind of went through your heads when that whole thing started to happen? Did you automatically come up with the idea of going virtual, or did you have to kind of really do some brainstorming or some heavy thinking in what you're going to transition or pivot? There's that pivot word. What you're going to move to or transform to.
Well, like I said, when stuff really fell off the calendar, both me and my business partner were in Hawaii, so we kind of didn't pay attention to anything for about a week, other than replying to clients going, yes, I have your email that you no longer are going to hire us for 10 days, 12 days worth of work. Then when we got back, we got hired to consult on a couple of projects. So we realized that we were giving out lots of information, but there was no reason that we couldn't do some of this ourselves, right? And we very luckily at January 1st of this year had hired 2 people to go full time with us that had experience in this kind of work that we are now doing. It was earlier in their lives, and some of it as volunteers at churches and other places like that. But we were able to know and hear from them their pitfalls and things that they had seen and build on top of that. So that was kind of, we were lucky enough to know our direction really early and know where we wanted to go. We just didn't know all of the stepstones to get there. And getting to the terrestrial part was pretty easy. We just had to, wipe some computers and reload them with software. But getting the stepstones to the cloud-based systems was much harder. And, we hired some people in a contract capacity to help us get to the first leg, I guess you could say, of doing a cloud system. And then we're able to
first beta or your first prototype.
Correct. And then be able to refine it and get things going from there. So we're actually, I would say, in our cloud system, we're on our version 3 now of that kind of build and iteration. We will. I see version 4 hopefully coming around in January for some larger jobs.
Very cool. So with some of I've always been fascinated. I mean, I think a lot of the future kind of course, falls inside of cloud-based technologies. And I think in a lot of ways, we're kind of scratching the surface, especially in our industry, of what those capabilities are. What were some of the things that you really look for in those streaming services, and what were, I guess some of the deal breakers, if you will, for the services that are offered? Because they're being used in a lot of cases in a much different way, right? They're not built for streaming video. They're built for transactions, or built for e-commerce, or built for retail purpose. And we're kind of taking, again, existing technologies and transforming them for the use of live entertainment or high bandwidth use, in streaming video.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the testing through the cloud stuff, it's really about figuring out what kind of horsepower you need and what the clients are willing to bear from a cost perspective of that, right? It's one of those things, in our media server world, we have never started to buy, we never invested in products that were a single box, right? A box that you buy and is ready to go. We always built our own and used software-based stuff that we could load on any type of computer. And the reason that we wanted to be able to do that was from cost perspective and scalability perspective, right? Like if there's a new GPU that would come out, we could put that new GPU on it. We don't always need the CPU power to change, right? The CPU can maybe change every 4 years, the GPU could change every 1 to 2. And you could be right on the edge of that technology. So the same idea within the cloud systems is what you want to try to go for, right? You're like, okay, does what we're going to do with this computer or this service need a GPU? Okay, it does. Okay, then that falls into this single category. What kind of GPU does it need? How much GPU? How many GPUs? Then it falls into another category. Is it CPU? Is the technology that we're using CPU heavy? Do we need a lot of cores? And what's really cool about the cloud-based system is you begin to, if you're like, I need a machine that has 96 cores, okay, cool. I'm going to click a couple buttons, and there it is. You don't have to take apart the computer and put a new processor on it or get a new motherboard. So you have a lot of flexibility to quickly change and discover some of that stuff. So it's a lot of playing back and forth, which unfortunately, you buy a computer once and you can play around with it all day long. In the cloud, you're being charged by the hour. But if you can figure out how to base your, base your investments around that, there's a lot of power that can be had there, a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of questions that are popping up here. First, Andy F. was asking, how will the changes that you've made play out for you once we are back in live events in person? And will you remain remote or will you be on site?
Hello, Andy. Good to hear from you. So it's actually a discussion that we're having right now is how do we successfully do both?
Yeah.
How as a company do I have both a virtual event service and an on-site service, right? Even though they're kind of two different products from a knowledge base, they have a lot of similarities. In the media server world, we always tried to break rules, right? Like someone say, well, that's not NTSC standard. I said, I've never read the rule book. So I always tried to. That's
a pretty typical answer.
Yeah, I tried to always push things and test the crap out of them, really. And we've done the same thing in the virtual world. So I think a lot of it's going to be, making sure that me and my partner Brandon can manage those teams. And then it's finding out those that would rather work from home than travel, and finding those who would rather travel than work from home, right? There's going to be a point in there where we're going to have to hire more people, because I know a lot of my people that we're working with now want to go back on site. They're begging to go back on site. And we've had a few on-site events that we've done, and it still, kind of feels dangerous. It doesn't feel safe as you would like it to be. So I think it's going to be a challenge. It's going to definitely be a point for us that will be, I guess, I don't want to say argument points of who stays at home and who goes, but there will have to be some, financial risks that we make in order to hire up to be able to do both.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a different challenge in all honesty. I personally think from a kind of an industrial perspective, or from a functional perspective, if you will, where you're going to have different requirements and needs for a concert environment than you will for a corporate event environment, or any other, say an experiential attraction or something like that you're trying to replicate these basically in-person events in a virtual setting, and being able to portray and push the same message or the same story back to the viewers as if they were in person.
Correct.
Which I think is going to be it's a big challenge for everybody, and it also opens a lot of opportunity as well to be able to focus on some of those different functions, I guess, if you will, or those different elements, right?
Yeah. Because I think when it comes to that, it's going to be a trickle.
Another pivot.
It's going to be a trickle of live events coming back, and then it's going to be a flood. But that flood point will take time. But then it'll be a lot of people trying to make up for things. So that'll be the big challenge: is how do you stay both, right? How do you not tell a client that you used to do 3 gigs for a year that I'm too busy?
Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite effect of what happened in March is what's going to end up happening once things kind of settle down. You'll have a little trickle of things coming in, and then it'll be like a tidal wave of events popping up so much that it's probably going to be unsustainable in a lot of
Well, there'll be venue issues for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking is in terms of physical event space, it's going to be booked to the brim.
Yes.
So I'm going to apologize because I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this properly. I'm going to give it my best shot, but Srikanth, or is it Srikanth, mentioned, do you use AWS for your cloud-based systems?
So yeah, we touched on that a little bit. We use AWS, Azure, and Google.
And do you use all 3 of them in conjunction with your offerings, or do you use them based on
different shows go different places? Yeah.
Got it.
A lot of international stuff goes on Azure. A good majority of stuff in the US goes on AWS. And then kind of more of our costly or cost-friendly, simpler things go on Google.
Do you also determine it maybe by what the company's backbones are and what their infrastructures are? Are you also kind of working
that has to do with international. So Azure some of the product offerings that you can get out of Azure have a lot better international grasp from them. The Google stuff has international as well. They're just not, we don't find them to be connected as well when you start going international. And the way Google works is so different from the other 2 that it's much easier for them to take on simpler projects. I think from bandwidth standpoints, they all are pretty strong. Got it.
So let's, I was just going to comment on Priscilla saying about the rain jacket. Yeah, I think everybody's going to have to wear their rain gear when that happens. So Michael was asking, what's your strategy for backup systems? And
so there's, first of all, we're in the cloud. So your first line of crash is pretty rare. I would say that I see terrestrial-based hardware crash 10 times more than anything in the cloud. I can probably see less than one hand out of the events, all the events that we've done this year where we've had crash. Usually, like most things, it's a software crash, right? So you can have redundant systems, but just like it is in terrestrial, if the client's not willing to pay for the backup, then it's really hard to justify the backup, right? For accessing it, that becomes a little bit more difficult, right? Because not all of our freelancers and all of our people can have redundant-based internet and redundant-based power. But we try to cross-train most of our people to be able to jump into someone else's seat if something were to happen to their internet while they're up. But just like terrestrial, there is a point, I believe, in the world of backups where you have overcomplicated your system to make it so backup safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much redundancy you can put into place before you can't rely on it anymore.
Correct. Yeah, or it's become so complicated when you have a problem, it takes you forever to figure out where the problem is.
Yeah. Or you're just at a simple critical failure state where there's just a point where, unfortunately, no recovery.
Correct.
Or at least a period of recovery that is going to be very noticeable. And at that point, you don't really care about redundancy, right?
Correct. Yeah. It's very rare that I ever saw 228 by 128 3G routers on a show.
Bomb at the same time.
Yeah, very rare.
Scott was just saying terrestrial based, which is a good perspective. And yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. So Cameron, let's get a little bit down into the nuts and bolts a little bit in some of the stuff that you have tested, some of the stuff that you are working with, and some of the stuff that you've, I guess, explored and had success with over the course of the last few months. I know back in the earlier days when you kind of first started this thing off, I remember sitting with you for the better part of an hour while you gave me some demos of some live demos of some of the work that you were doing. And that was, I think that was back in April, the last time that we spoke, or sometime, it was earlier on in the year. Mm-hmm. When you were showing me some of the prompting systems that you had developed and some of the technology you were working with. So yeah. I'm imagining that's probably evolved quite significantly in the last 6 months.
Yeah. So again, it's like most of our terrestrial shows. We kind of try to fit things to the client's needs as much as possible. We are still using some media server stuff. Our broadcast graphics that we use, like lower thirds, slide panels, other things like that, are either Pixera or Smode. And those seem to be working out very well for us because they're software-based. We can load them in the cloud. And we use their dongle-based systems and transport that dongle information across into those pieces. And they use NDI, so we use that NDI to composite on top of our stuff. The prompter systems we've mostly used to use outside prompter companies now, and they kind of have their own choice of their software, so we give them an instance in the cloud for them to run it on. Those products come into several different types of products depending upon what it is. We've been utilizing vMix, Haivision, Sienna. So it all kind of depends upon the budget and what we think the needs are and what we think the flexibility of the show is going to need. Graphics are mostly, traditional graphics are mostly PowerPoint. AWS has just released
PowerPoint forever. It's never going to die.
Forever, yeah. In theory, we could use, I forget what that web-based one is. What is it called? I can't remember right now. We have used Keynote. Keynote has a ability to share its presentation as a web link. There's just you lose a little bit of the smoothness of the beauty of Keynote with its transitions. However, AWS has just added Mac Minis to some of their cloud systems. Yes, so we're in the process of testing that to see. Yes, Prezi. Thank you, Scott Riley. So we're in the process of testing being able to do Keynote natively in the cloud and be able to get back a lot of the transitions and stuff that people like to use. So we use some products from Medialux. We use some products from, let's see, who else? I think that covers most of them. Yeah.
It sounds like a pretty good range.
Yeah, and it's really about trying to meet what we think the client's going to need and their budgets. Some of them get to have the biggest and the best toys because they have nice big budgets, and some of them need simpler, smaller stuff. And that's, I feel like, one of the things that has really helped us is being able to be nimble in that and be able to service someone with a budget of $5,000 and service someone with a budget of $500,000.
Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, when it really comes down to it, and shows and events have always revolved around budget, right? So everything is always going to be budget conscious to one degree or to another. Chet, hey Chet, he was asking, will you also push Unity to AWS?
Yes, I will actually tell. So one of the other key things I would say to our success that we've had through this time is our partnerships. One of our partnerships has been with Amirani, and Ben Ryle. We've been doing some game shows with him, and we did just use Unity in the cloud for that. And it worked out fairly well. So yes, Chet, we have used Unity with partnership with Ben.
That's very cool. Again, it's really interesting to see how some of these things perform, because again, I think we're very much in the infancy of cloud-based processing and being able to shove stuff up into remote servers to have them run, and then also the challenges of having them intercommunicate with each other when you are running, different instances of different softwares and different protocols to be able to control those instances that are cloud-based. So I'd be interested to hear as well about some of the challenges you might have had, or maybe some of the solutions that you've had with communication and cross-communication between products, and working with people that are remote and working with operators that are also remote.
So version 1 of our cloud.
I love the little giggle, by the way.
Definitely had some hiccups along that same range. And I can tell you a fun story of how one show went. We
love fun stories.
Yeah. So this was a large show that had multiple studios, all operating at the same time to service different parts of the show. And I was actually in what you could call command central with 3 different headsets on, which is very challenging because we only have 2 ears. And one of the studio's lead switch operator lost control of his system in the beginning of the show. Like literally, I think as we rolled the countdown. And we ended up having him, I'm trying to remember the exact path it was, but I believe he team viewered into another machine, which then connected to the cloud machine in order for us to get through the show. So that was a good lesson.
The Inception Effect.
Correct. Yes, there was definitely some deep Inception. And so we worked through some of that and figured out what some of those problems were. During that same version, we would have times where we would lose USB connections with things. And most of the times those were luckily quickly solvable, because you just get to see a license limit or a flash for half a frame before the switch op would catch it and pull it. And then you have to do some rebooting and get that back. But we solved that starting with version 2. There's still some occasional glitches. Most of it has to do with internet, as opposed with the way that the user is communicating with the cloud. And those problems have, like I said, for the most part gone away. But it was definitely, for the first few months, challenging and very, you got that adrenaline back that you used to have during shows, but just from adrenaline of fear, as opposed to adrenaline of excitement.
Well, it's the fear that triggers the adrenaline, right?
Yes, exactly.
when you're pushing a button and you're hoping to God it's going to work.
Yes,
Or
yeah.
when-
You're still losing sleep. You're just not losing it because you're working long hours. You're just worried about how the next day is going to go.
Worried sick, a different type of worry.
Yes.
So Randy actually brought up a question that, of course, is on everybody's minds, and within the prediction element of when do we think live events will restart. It's hard to predict. I
want you to go first because I'm a pessimist.
Pardon?
I said you should go first because I'm a pessimist.
I mean, I think it depends on how well the results of this vaccines, how well the results of the vaccines are, and how much adoption there is globally on the acceptance of those vaccines and whatever side effects might come out of them. It's going to be, I personally think that the adoption rate, and this is just me speaking like crap out of my brain, but I think that the adoption rate's going to probably be in the ballpark of like maybe 50%, maybe at first. It might be a little bit higher than that, but I'm guessing somewhere in the ballpark of of 50% of the population saying, yeah, cool, stick a needle in my arm and give me a vaccine that has been rapidly tested. But if there is a good adoption rate and if things go smoothly, let's just say, then I would say, and the vaccines are widely available by, say, summer of 2021, because it's going to take quite a long time to amp that up and be able to distribute worldwide. Probably looking at the earliest time frame, I'm going to say is fall of 2021, if not pushing into Q1 of 2022. That would be my magic guess if I had to take something out of like the future hat.
Yes. Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that point. I've told my wife, in no offense, but I hope to not be in Germany next Thanksgiving because I will be flying back to the States to do Christmas shows. So in all hopes, I hope that I get to start seeing car show season and maybe LDI. But I think those will be stretch.
Yeah, I just have a gut feeling about things not really clearing up. And Tracy brought up an interesting idea of inside or outside. I mean, outside adoption, I think, is going to be quicker to some degree, but of course, limited capacities and a lot of restrictions on distancing and precautions taken on health, of course, on how people are feeling. I think we're going to have to naturally accept that getting your temperature taken to go to different places is just going to be a thing now. Like you're going to have to get used to having something stuck close to your head to take your temperature before you enter an event. Or, I mean, I just went to the dentist like last week for the first time since this whole thing happened, and they clocked me before I was able to go through the door to go to the sit in the seat, So I think we're going to just have to kind of adopt different standards and kind of just roll with what's going to be thrown at us over the course of the next several months until things kind of find their new normal.
Right. Agreed.
Or at least that's been that's my personal opinion.
I'm curious what is going to change in insurance requirements.
I don't even want to know.
End
up changing for insurance requirements.
Yeah. The insurance requirement things are what's going to be scary because it runs all through what we do. If everyone has to have their own kind of new insurance policy that costs a ton of money, then rates are going to go up, and therefore ticket sales are going to be going up, and everything to do shows is going to go up.
Yeah, that brings up another good point about just natural inflation as a whole, because I know that I've seen a definite increase in just bare necessities, and going to the grocery store now when you're going and doing a normal load of groceries, I'd say for us it's probably increased on like 20% ish. Yeah, at least 20%.
Yeah.
From what it was pre-pandemic.
And what's the opposite effect to that is, I don't know if you read, I think the New York Philharmonic just signed contracts to be on a 25% pay cut until 2023, and then slowly build to the end of 2025. I may have my years off, but I think the calculations are correct. And that's a big thing, because those are all union jobs. And I find when union jobs start to make those kinds of concessions, then it pushes through everything else. And that stuff gets a little freaky, I think the Met is in a big fight right now about the same thing. So that the combination of inflation with the want and forced drive of rates in the entertainment world is a little bit of a scary thing.
Yeah, I would have to wholeheartedly agree with you there. There's just so many variables that we actually don't even think of in a lot of cases, before a lot of people that work in the industry don't even think in a lot of times about insurance. You think about it on a personal level, but you don't really think about it on a corporate level or on a higher level where, it's completely company related, and insurances that have to be put into place for that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that what's happened in the outcomes of the pandemic for those insurances and for those regulations are going to change pretty radically, I think, over the course of the next year. One of the things that I wanted to touch base with you too, just kind of bringing our train back onto the tracks, and trying to end this in a high note, but
yes, thank you.
When you're working with your clients in a remote fashion, and this question has actually come up in the past from some of the past shows that we've done, how do you get that equipment back to your clients in a safe manner? Do you have a sterilization process? Do you have them handle and get some of the gear themselves or acquire it? How do you basically handle that and mitigate that?
So yes, I would say 98% of the time, the gear comes back right to us, and it is cleaned by one of two people in our company and sterilized and then put back in the box and marked clean and ready to go. This next coming year, we're going to be continuing that process, as well as adding a lot of cleaning materials with the kits themselves as they go out, so that they can have the stuff ready to go if they don't feel confident that it was clean. And so, like little alcohol wipes and things like that to do as well. But yes, and I think the believe it or not, the weirdest thing and hardest thing that we've had is people taking all the gear out of the kits and then leaving the lid open and cats sleeping in them. Getting cat hair and animal hair out of pelican foam is tough, very tough. I've definitely had a lot of phone calls from our guys cursing and just wanting to buy all new foam.
So those of you who are watching who are looking for a new business opportunity, I think Cameron just put it in black and white. We need an animal hair removal service.
Yes,
for the foam inside of travel cases.
Yeah, just having those sticky rollers does not seem to get it out.
I was thinking to myself, cleaning the microphone or the microphone wind filters and stuff like that would be challenging, because of course people are speaking right into them. Maybe you'd make them disposable actually at that point.
Well,
throwing windscreens away.
We actually use, if they do not choose to use the lapel mic, which is disposable, we use shotgun mics. And so those are a good ways away from them. So we find a good Lysol cleaning with those is just fine.
Cool. Well, that's great. That's great to know. And it's some really good knowledge. Cameron, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. It's been a really fun conversation. I think we've covered quite a bit of grounds. For those of you who are watching and want to get some, continue the conversation with Cameron, you can reach out to him at CameronY@thrasosmedia.com. And Cameron, is there any other kind of platforms or social media platforms that you might be commonly perusing that people might be able to touch base with you as well? And
oh yeah, we have all of the ones that no one ever wants to pay attention to. Twitter. We're on Twitter, Thrasos Media. We're on LinkedIn, Thrasos Media. Instagram, Thrasos Media. I'm pretty sure we're Thrasos Media on all of them. So.
All right, awesome. And Priscilla looks like she's already tied in a link for something called the Chom Chom roller for cat hair.
Oh, nice.
I've never personally heard of it, but there you go. Maybe there's a solution waiting to happen for you.
Yes, that is actually consulting cat people is something that we have not done. So I didn't even think of that. Thank you.
See, there we go. That's what this whole thing is all about. So next week, we're going to have our guest, Vince Keldebeck, on the show. He is the founder and CEO of a newly founded company called Spatial Activations. Some of you might know him as the founder and director of Meow Wolf. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation in speaking about Meow Wolf and what they're also kind of doing to cope their way through the pandemic and some of the transitions and pivots that they've there it is again, man. I'm not going to be able to get that word out of my head for the rest of the day.
It's hard.
It's stuck in there. I'm just going to pivot my way out of here. But thank you so much, Cameron, for being on the show today. It's been a whole lot of fun. We do have a Patreon page again for those of you who are willing to help us through, supporting what we're doing. So that's at our hero page, and then we also have a swag page, as I mentioned as well. So thanks everybody for viewing, and as I say again every single week, thanks everyone, and stay ahead of the curve, everybody. Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you.
Pivot, pivot, pivot.